Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to week 17, which is going to be basically a summary of the last four chapters, which will encompass your final exam. So we will take a very quick, a very brief look at each chapter. I might even throw in a couple of focal points for you to kind of focus on, if you will, and hopefully that will guide you through your final exam. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. And what you can see up right now is a slideshow of the Bill of Rights. And I think it's important that we start off with that, not only because it is extremely important, especially when it comes to law enforcement, but also because it's going to be on your final exam. So there will be 7, 8, 9. I can't remember how many questions on the Bill of Rights, but it would be a really good thing for you to review this. Also, in the week 17 content folder, I have this same PowerPoint in there, and there are some links that are embedded within the PowerPoint that will take you to short 6, 7 minute video clips that talk about each one of the amendments as we kind of walk through this process. So that should help you learn as well. But again, something very, very important. So, the first thing that we need to kind of remember, and I think we all know this, but we're going to go through it anyway. The Americans, of course, declared their independence from Great Britain in 1776. And in 1787, they adopted the United States Constitution. And the Constitution told how their new government was basically going to work. And some states still, though the Constitution is there, some states kind of think that the Constitution didn't say enough, and specifically enough about the rights of people. So there are those that think that there should be more. And so in 1791, Congress added the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and these first 10 amendments to the Constitution are typically referred to as the Bill of Rights, and these are very, very applicable to law enforcement and have been and will continue to be for, I'm sure through law enforcement's history, whenever that tends to end, if it ever does. So, and the Bill of Rights basically, they are individual rights that the government can't take away. And so these are things that we have that are somewhat entitled to us, I guess. And while we don't apply every one of these each and every day in policing, you will quickly see that some are very important to law enforcement and the job that law enforcement officers do each and every day. And you may already know that by taking some other criminal justice courses, and you've seen the application of the Bill of Rights to different case laws and different scenarios and things like that. So hopefully you've had a chance to kind of learn that. So the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And kind of on a easier way to read, if you will, getting through all of the constitutionalese writing that we just kind of heard, would be things like freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press and the right to peaceably assemble and the right to petition the government for redress. So as you can see here, there's also a link to a video that I think you will find, I'm not going to say exciting, but you'll find it interesting, and it tells a little bit more about that First Amendment. So moving on. The Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So in kind of a shorter version here, the Second Amendment talks about the right to keep and bear arms, and gun ownership issues, and even the Brady Law, actually. So, and here you can also see that there's a link to a video that will provide you with a little bit more detail. The Third Amendment to the Constitution. This amendment guards against the forced quartering of troops. In the years before the American Revolution, British officials forced the colonists to quarter, to house and feed basically British troops. And the amendment goes like this: no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. So there you have the Third Amendment. The Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, it forbids, search and seizure under the exclusionary rule, which has a couple of case laws that are attached to it, if you will, Weeks versus United States and Mapp versus Ohio, things that we've talked about already. Requires probable cause, of course, and no warrant issued without probable cause. So the Fifth Amendment, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service, time of war, or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life, limb, nor shall be compelled any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be derived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And while that is truly a mouthful, a slimmed down version of that would be no double jeopardy, which we've talked about, the privilege against self-incrimination, no deprivation of life, liberty, or property by federal government without the due process of law. So the guarantees, due process, substantive, and procedural. So again, there's a YouTube video where you can kind of go back and look at that if you want to get some more information, and I really suggest that you do. The Sixth Amendment. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. And kind of a shorter version again of the Sixth Amendment, establishing requirements for criminal trials. So a speedy public trial by an impartial jury of one's peers, be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, be confronted with and able to cross-examine witnesses against oneself, subpoena witnesses in one's defense, and be represented by legal counsel. So all of these are things that fall under the Sixth Amendment, and again, there's a video link for you to look at too. The Seventh Amendment. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy, sorry about that, shall exceed $20, the right of a trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. So this, it is a little bit kind of interesting, and when you listen to the writing styles here, but this amendment lays out the rules of common law. And without going into too much more detail, I'll have you go to the link and you can kind of get a video clip on the Seventh Amendment. The Eighth Amendment. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So fairly simple, no excessive bail or excessive fines, cruel and unusual punishment. This does deal with issues regarding the death penalty, and again, a link for you to look to see a little bit more about the Eighth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed or deny or disparage others retained by the police. So this amendment ensures that the individual rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution are secure. That is, meaning that these rights should not be automatically infringed upon just because they're omitted from the Constitution or they're not written down. So hopefully that makes enough sense to you, and definitely, look at the link and get a little bit more information on the Ninth Amendment because, dude, isn't it exciting? The 10th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And I have a link listed up there as well for the 10th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment, even though I said we were just going to do the first 10, this one kind of comes into play as well because a lot of due process falls into this area. So I think it's important that you see it. So all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law that shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So simply put, looking under the selective incorporation doctrine, only those provisions of the Bill of Rights fundamental to the American legal process are applicable to the states throughout the due process clause. The Second Amendment remains non-incorporated, meaning not made applicable to the states, applies to laws enacted by the states, and the due process portion specifically orders state and local officers to provide the legal protections of due process. So no deprivation of life, liberty, or property without due process. So basically, all people are created equal, and there is no denial of equal protection, and that is the overview of the 14th Amendment. So with that being said, we're going to kind of quickly move into our overview or our summary of these chapters, and we're going to be looking at specifically 11 through 14, which is going to be your final. So chapter 11 talks about issues concerning police conduct, and yes, there is a separate video for each chapter that you can watch. Audio, but I guess it's a video anyway. And anyway, chapter 11 focuses on the issues relating to how officers behave on the job. First, looking at a kind of a brief review or areas of police discretion, and it continues with a look at the critical issues of discrimination in enforcing the law based on individuals' gender, class, or race, and how discrimination differs from disparity. The chapter then kind of looks at police use of force, police pursuits, things like civil liability associated with specific conduct, and then we conclude the chapter with a look at issues of officer corruption, ethics, and integrity. And for this chapter, I think that if you took a look at pursuits in general, that would be an area that you probably want to focus on. So kind of looking at some things here, you should know what is kind of the perspective, if you will, on pursuits. And you certainly should know one of the case laws that set the standard for liability in police pursuits. And I think that you should also know factors that kind of influence pursuits. And when you're kind of looking at some other things there, as we talked about discrimination and disparity, I would suggest that you know what one of the most important discretionary options police officers have, because that's really big. And you should know what it means that when you treat individuals differently, what is that called? And you should know the definition of discrimination. You should know the definition of disparity. And you should know how law enforcement deals with those two concepts, and how does law enforcement avoid charges of things like that. I would also suggest that you look at use of force issues in this chapter, and look at what the definition of excessive force would be, and look at some things relating to less lethal force and the different types that are out there. And also maybe even taking a look at factors that contribute to officer training, such as maybe the definition of conditioned hesitation and things like that. So hopefully that kind of gives you a little taste of what I'm looking for when it comes to chapter 11 on your final, and then we'll kind of move forward into chapter 12. And again, this is only meant to kind of just wet your whistle a little bit. It's not meant to give you all of the stuff. So you already had my video lecture on some of the other ones. So, you should be fine. So chapter 12 begins with some suggestions about how to evaluate and select law enforcement, because this chapter is on becoming a law enforcement professional. Part of the chapter contains a look at recruiting, selection, and guidelines and regulations that affect employment, including a couple things like the Equal Employment Opportunity Act and things like that, the American Disabilities Act. And after you get hired, if you do, looking at things like probation and training and what do those things really mean, and some other things like salary, benefits, promotional opportunities, and things like that. So it ends up with talking about and having a discussion on being a law enforcement professional and what that kind of really means. And while I, of course, have my own ideas, this exam is for you, so there you have it. But so focusing in on some things that you may want to look at would be the hiring process itself. So what steps are taken in the hiring process, and which one might you do first? Also, some things that most agencies might require that you have in order to qualify for being a police officer, and maybe some reasons why there might be a lack of qualified recruits out there. So why are some of these things out there? Parts of that recruiting process and testing process would be things like the written exam. So knowing what that is, sort of, not like all the questions, but what is a written exam and the oral interview, things like that. You may want to even kind of read the area that's talking about why we give polygraphs to people, and why is that so. I would also kind of ask you to look at some of the tasks that officers do, and some of those critical tasks that they do. I would also, or finally, have you take a close look at things like hostile work environment or sexual harassment, and finish up with the Civil Rights Act. So I think that these are good focal points for you to look at as you start to kind of move through the chapters and are completing your final exam. So now let's move on to chapter 13. And this chapter basically starts off with kind of a overview of the court system in the United States, including state court, juvenile court, federal court, and the Supreme Court, and some of the other specialized courts that are out there. And it also focuses on the fact that the courts are basically an adversary system. And some of the key players in that system, like defendants and prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges and things like that. Then the chapter moves on to some critical stages in the criminal justice system, looking at some different cases, also kind of a description of what a typical trial might be, and then concludes with a short discussion on the police officer's role in courts and courtroom security. So that's kind of the summary of chapter 3, if you will. So, I think that you should know what that adversary system is. And the fact that our criminal justice system is based on that. And I just gave you the answer to that question. So what the heck? Anyway, focus on things like some new things like a reentry court. What is that, and how does that play into things? And from the juvenile side, perhaps knowing the definition of a petition and some key players in that judicial process, like the judge, the prosecutor, the jury. What are they there for? What are their roles, if you will? And what is plea bargaining? Things like that. What is a bench trial? And when the defense attorney tries to discredit the prosecution witnesses, what part of the court, does that take place? I guess more specifically is, like when. There's a name for that, so you may want to kind of figure out what that name is. And then at the end of the day, if they can't make a decision on this big, huge trial that they're going on, what is that called when they can't make a decision, the jury, when they can't come to that decision? So I think those are a couple of things that you may want to focus yourself on. And then we'll finish up now with chapter 14, and we'll be talking about corrections and what role corrections plays. So chapter 14 begins with information on the development of corrections, including the purpose it is meant to serve throughout many, many years. It's followed by an overview of contemporary corrections and a discussion of pretrial services and detention. There are some areas of alternatives to corrections in there, including things like the intermediate sanctions or short-term incarcerations. Those things are kind of explained. Probation is explained. It also takes a little bit of time talking about parole and the differences between probation and parole, and also looking at the various community-based reintegration programs that are available to deal with this word called recidivism, which we've touched on, I think, in a different chapter, but you should already know what the definition of that is. And if you don't, without even going into the focus area here, you should probably know what that means. Anyway, I would probably know some things like what defines deterrence, if you will, and looking at different correctional alternatives to incarceration. What are some of those? And some court-ordered disposition alternatives that might be out there. So what are some of those that are actually court-ordered, though? Probation, you should know. Parole, you should know. All of these things. What is the goal of restitution? And even the primary goal of the correctional institution, what is that? And how do jails differ from prisons? Is there a difference at all? And the short answer is yes, there is. And that's something that you'll kind of need to look at. And then finally, I'd look at the primary focus of juvenile corrections versus, let's say, adult corrections. Because, while they're both through the Department of Corrections, if you will, they both have some similar things, but there are some differences specifically as it relates to the goal of each. So take a look at those. Okay, so that is kind of a quick down and dirty summary of the Bill of Rights, and also a summary of chapters 11 through 14, that in combination with, of course, your individual chapter lectures, your extreme diligence in reading every PowerPoint that I put up there to the nth degree, along with reading your textbooks, because I know that you guys do that, right? You read every single word in your textbooks, sure. You should do fine on your final exam. So I hope that the class has been good for you. I will probably in week 18, the week of the final, I'll post something in there as kind of a final farewell, but this is just, again, week 17, the chapter review. So with that being said, that's it for the review. Have a great final, and remember, that's next week. This is 17, so the final will be next week. But I certainly appreciate your guys' attention, because I know that you watched every video that I put out there. I appreciate your participation in the discussion boards and some of the other class things that we did. Your essays were fabulous, and I am truly honored to have been your instructor this semester. So I look forward to maybe taking another online class with all of you in the very near future. And with that, that will be it for tonight. Good night.